Hello and welcome back everyone to yet another episode of A to Z Chess Opening Series. And in today's episode, we are going to discuss about everyone's favorite, the King's Gambit. King's Gambit. In today's video, we are going to see three amazing traps. How you can win against any beginner to intermediate level player using these traps. So it starts with e4 and he copies us replies with e5. At that time we go aggressive. We sacrifice a pawn. We play our pawn to f4. Here there are three things that he could do that we are going to see in our video today. If he What happens if he accepts and what happens if he declines. We'll start with what happens when he declines the variation. So if he declines the gambit and he plays his knight to c6 protecting that e5 pawn, we'll play a knight to f3 putting some more pressure on that e5 pawn. Now if he plays d6 trying to protect it further, at that time you play normally bishop c4. That is the best square to put your bishop on that diagonal. Now, when he plays his bishop to g4, trying to pin your knight to the queen, we castle, getting our king, getting our rook in the potential open file. If he plays his knight to d4, thinking that we are just losing it, then this is the beginning of the end. Why? Because now comes the fantastic sacrifice, the classic sacrifice on the f7 square. Bishop f7. If the king captures it, then knight to g5 gives a check. If your opponent tries to act smart here, thinking that, okay, I just lost a piece, but I can win it back, maybe we got that piece back. We got our piece back by the interest because we have destructed the pawn structure and we have won a pawn. Also, the king cannot castle. You are going to win this bishop. But if your opponent tries to act smart here and tries to capture your knight, thinking that if I capture the knight and when he'll capture back, on the next immediate move, I'm going to capture the queen. But that is not the case. Why? Because he forgets that there is a discovered check in this position. So the king will have to move and you win the bishop. Here also, you are not only a piece but a queen up. So that's fantastic. But what if he is not capturing on g5? Instead, he's just moving his king. Let's say the king goes back on the g8 square. Then you play queen g4. Now, if he thinks that, okay, what happened? I just lost a pawn and the right to castle, but I can win the rook. Knight c2 is winning the rook, and there's no way that white can save this rook, right? But white has something else in the mind. This time, white captures on the e5 square. If the pawn captures it back, then he sacrifices the third piece. He plays his rook to f8, giving a check. The king captures it, then tata, bye bye to the queen because knight e6 gives a fork, attacks the king as well as the queen. And eventually the g7 pawn will also be hanging. So that's how you win the queen there. Alright. Now let's quickly have a look at the trap number 2. What if the opponent accepts the gambit? If he accepts the gambit, he's going to capture the pawn on the f4 square. Now, once e takes on f4, we have to go with a knight to f3 for the development and not allow his queen to come on h4 because queen h4 check once the f file is open is a little dangerous. So, knight f3 is our idea. Now, here the classic line is to protect the pawn by playing the pawn to g5. Once he plays his pawn to g5, here usually you can play a pawn to h4. Now the idea behind pawn h4 is if he captures here, if g takes on h4, then look at these four pawns. Making a rectangle but not working. All the pawns are weak and we are eventually going to win the pawn by the bishop, by the knight, by the rook, by any of the piece we want in the future. So this is not working. What if he defends it with his pawn to h6? Well, that doesn't work too because when you capture g takes on h takes on g5, we capture it back. Look at this pawn. The pawn was pinned to the rook down there. So cannot do that too. And most of the players then think, okay, if I cannot play h6, how about f6? Can I go f6? If he plays his pawn to f6 at the time, you can just capture on g5 square. The pawn captures it back. Now you go queen h5 check. That was a surprising sacrifice, but queen h5 check. The king comes up, you capture the pawn, you give a check, the king goes back. We give a check at the again on the we give a check again on the h5 square. Then the king comes up, you give a check on e5. This time, why have we done this one waste move, you would say, or an intermediate move to go on the h5 square and only then go to e5? Why not directly to e5? So there's a slight difference. When you play it directly to e5, then the queen can block the check. But when you do this, bringing But when you do this, bringing the king up and then only going to e5, so the queen, the bishop, the knight, none of the piece could block the check. So the king will have to move. And then instead of capturing the rook, you go with the check. You play a bishop to c4. Remember the three forcing moves in chess: check, capture, threat. You have to follow that every single time. Here, instead of capturing something, if you could give a check and that would result into a better position, you have to look for that check. Bishop to c4. If the king comes up, then another check comes with queen f5. The king goes down. Now you play your queen to f7. King comes up, and this is a beautiful checkmate. You just capture on f4. King goes there. You play f7 again, and this time a checkmate, a beautiful checkmate by a discovered check is by playing the pawn to d4. The bishop, the sniper there looks at the king. Doesn't matter even if the queen blocks the check, because this is going to be a fantastic checkmate in that position. All right. So this was all about the trap number 2, when he accepts the gambit. The other trap, my third trap, is also when he accepts the gambit, when he captures e takes on the f4 square, then you play your knight to f3. He goes with the classic line again, playing pawn to g5, but this time there's a slight difference that we are going to go. Instead of playing the pawn to h4, we are going to play a knight to c3. Now, if he pushes his pawn up, trying to kick that knight off and bringing the queen on the h4 square to give a check, we are not afraid of anything like this, because this time we are going to go knight e5. If the queen comes on the h4 square, gives you a check, you play your pawn to g3. Not necessary that you have to recapture it with the pawn and lose the rook here, but do an intermediate move, which is play your queen to g4 with a check. Play your queen to g4, winning the pawn. If here also your opponent tries to use that little extra tactic that he has by pushing his pawn up to g2, thinking that he can win an extra rook, when you capture the queen, he captures the rook and makes it a queen. But look at the position, all the pieces are just set there. And you can trap this queen anytime, at any point of time, you can just trap the queen. You can start it by playing your knight to d5. Now, knight to d5, the idea was to give a checkmate, obviously, on the c7 square. So he defended it by playing his knight to a6, and we play our pawn to d4. What is the idea? Idea is to bring the bishop out in the game. Now, when he plays his bishop to e7, you sacrifice the queen, the knight captures it back, and this is going to be a beautiful checkmate. If the king goes to f8, then bishop to h6. And if the king goes to d8, then it's a checkmate with two knights, to which your opponent can also call as the nightmare. Alright. This was one line. If he pushes his pawn up, what if he just captures the queen on the g4 square with the queen? So if he captures, we can capture it back with the knight, and you're going into a completely equal end game, or maybe better for white because of the development that white has. Black has not developed any single piece yet. Three pieces he had moved, and all of those pieces are lost, both the pawns and the queen. So overall, this is a fantastic position for white to play. I hope you would like this traps, and if you want to know more about this King's Gambit trap, then do let me know in the comment box and I'll make a video on that. Till the time, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and share with your chess friends. I'll see you again in the next video. Bye bye.